Hello again. We need to continue our work on topic 2 of core 4. We're in topic 2 about energy flow. So in 2a, we talked about photosynthesis and how the point of photosynthesis is to oxidize water to release low energy electrons. Sunlight is then used to excite those low energy electrons into high energy electrons. Those high energy electrons are then bonded to CO2, which is the reduction of carbon dioxide to produce macromolecules. Right, so now 2b asks you about energy release from those carbon compounds. When you take these carbon compounds, in this example glucose, which with its high energy electrons, and you rip that molecule apart, you get energy out. And that process is cellular respiration. So they refer to it as aerobic cellular respiration. So cellular respiration is the breaking down of macromolecules. It can be done in the presence of oxygen. When cellular respiration occurs in the presence of oxygen, we call it aerobic or aerobic cellular respiration. If this occurs without oxygen, then we call it anaerobic cellular respiration. And again, we'll get to this in core 8 in more detail. So, cell resp. Chemical equation for cell resp takes your macromolecule, your glucose, in the presence of oxygen. There's no light that's required here because this occurs in the mitochondria. So in the presence of enzymes, you have CO2 as a byproduct, you have water as a byproduct, and you produce the energy molecule of ATP, the energy molecule of all living things. Then don't forget about your stoichiometry. 1 mole of macromolecules, 1 mole of glucose requires 6 moles of oxygen, producing 6 moles of carbon dioxide as a byproduct, 6 moles of water as a byproduct, and then 36 molecules of ATP. And of course, there's some heat loss as well. Now, the same colors that are here, we have to use those same colors here, because all cell resp really is photosynthesis backwards. In photosynthesis, you're putting the molecules together, and in cellular respiration, you're ripping them back apart. All cellular respiration is photosynthesis backwards, okay? So I'm going to use the same colors here. Don't forget, matter cannot be created nor destroyed. So here's my carbon from the macromolecule, and here's my carbon, once again, recycling, thus the carbon cycle, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, in the carbon dioxide. And then we did the, the green for hydrogen. So when you rip the macromolecule apart, that hydrogen ends back up in the water. That's a byproduct. You then have the oxygen here, which is the oxygen and carbon dioxide. So you see how when the macromolecule is ripped apart, you simply get the same carbon dioxide back together. That's why we breathe out CO2. The CO2 that we breathe out comes from our food. It comes from macromolecules. But don't forget, plants have mitochondria. Plants do cellular respiration also. Therefore, guess what? When plants do cell resp, plants release CO2. This whole concept that we breathe out CO2 for plants and they release oxygen for us is a complete misconception. Plants don't need us at all. Alrighty, and then the oxygen, of course, that we breathe in ends up in the water of our urine. Well, hold it, if plants do cell resp, guess what? Plants need oxygen also, okay? So this concept that plants need us for carbon dioxide doesn't exist. All right, so why are we talking about this? Because don't forget, when we did this earlier, the carbon and the oxygen are ripped out here. This is decarboxylation. The electrons that are in the macromolecule, these high energy electrons get ripped out. Well, hold it, your glucose is losing electrons, which means your glucose is being oxidized. In cellular respiration, the macromolecules are oxidized because the high energy electrons are ripped out. That's why you will hear biochemists say that cellular respiration is an oxidative process. That's what they're talking about. These high energy electrons are then converted to low energy electrons. When you do this conversion, energy comes out. That energy is used to bond, not to create, but to bond ADP and P. When you bond ADP and P inside of the mitochondrion, you make ATP by the process of phosphorylation. You then have the low energy electrons here. Well, then the oxygen, actually, I'll just keep that green. The oxygen is then bonded to these low energy electrons. Don't forget about your proton also, because an electron plus a proton makes hydrogen. Well, if the oxygen and the protons are picking up, they're gaining these electrons. Since oxygen is gaining the electrons, therefore oxygen is reduced. You see how these are coupled reactions? Whenever you have oxidation and reduction, whenever you have oxidation, you always have reduction. They go hand in hand. They're coupled reactions. And oxidation always happens first. Always. The electrons have to come out in order to be transferred to something else. So oxidation always comes first, which is why students get confused, because what do chemists call this? They call these redox reactions, which is misleading, because what really comes first? The oxidation. The oxidation comes first. These should actually be ox-red reactions, but nobody calls them ox-red reactions. We call them redox. But understand that it's actually the reverse process, that oxidation always comes first, reduction always comes second, right? So then the low energy electron plus the proton makes hydrogen. Hydrogen plus the water makes the byproduct of, oxygen plus the hydrogen makes water, which is the other byproduct. Okay, so again, notice how photosynthesis and cellular respiration are really about the movement of high energy electrons. It's all about the chemistry, right? So it's oxidation and reduction. So then we need to tie this back to that 4-box diagram that you drew earlier about the producers and the consumers. So you look at that 4-box diagram. You have a box, and a box, and a box, and a box. And we had energy transfer here, and here, and here, like such. And you had your abiotic factors here, you had your producers here, you had your consumers here, and you had your saprotrophs here. And of course, son. He's got kind of a flat face today. All right. So then we had photosynthesis here. Don't lose the big picture. There is photosynthesis right here. Oxidation and reduction. You then had cell resp here, and cell resp here, and cell resp here. Oxidation, reduction. Okay. Then ultimately, cellular respiration happens there by the saprotrophs, and as the carbon dioxide and water are recycled, that's why we refer to this as abiotic factor recycling, or some people call it nutrient recycling. Okay, so oxidation, reduction, photosynthesis, and cellular respiration are very intimately connected. It's all about the transfer. It goes from low energy electrons to high energy electrons back to low energy electrons. This is photosynthesis. This is cell resp. And then, hey, guess what? Cycles back. Okay? And everything in biology, it cycles. It's all the same thing. It's the same electrons. It's the same carbon. It's the same hydrogen. What is new? The energy from the sun, which is why topic 2 is all about energy flow. Ta-da! Have fun.